Hello, fellow Marlovians. I live in the rural foothills of the Sierra Mountains where it is impossible to do a live video. Therefore, I've created this narrated slideshow for the Marlowe Day gathering. I will begin the narration with a general description of my new book. It is the misshapen image put forth by traditional scholars that stops people from taking Christopher Marlowe seriously as the strongest Shakespeare candidate. The purpose of Christopher Marlowe, Every Word Doth Almost Tell My Name, is to give his authorship evidence, overlooked by an academia mainly composed of traditionalists resistant to the idea someone other than the Stratford Shakespeare wrote the works, and to mend misinformation perpetuated by their assumptions about Marlowe. Essay 2, The Misshapen Image, shows how a negative view of Marlowe has been foisted into the literary realm. The writings of three traditional academics is explored in essays 2, 13, and 25. While novelists have had a field day recreating Marlowe's life through their imaginations, many of these essays tell his story through the lens of Sonnets 33, 34, 74, 76, 111, and 112. The new interpretations answer many of our questions around the feigning of Marlowe's death and Bain's note. In these sonnets, Marlowe is telling us he was not at Deptford for the feigning of his death, and he was not happy about how they made him out to be a man who would strike another from behind in order to get Fraser off on a plea of murder in self-defense. They also give his response to the bestowal of the Shakespeare pseudonym, his feelings about the two informers, Baines and Drury, and his knowledge that Archbishop John Whitgift was behind Baines' accusations of heresy. Several of these sonnets read like letters to the man who would likely have overseen the feigning of Marlowe's death, Thomas Walsingham. I would not have been able to do these interpretations if not for A.D. Raitt pointing the way with her hypothesis about the exile sonnets. She was so busy mapping the wide terrain of Marlowe's life in her books that she didn't approach a detailed interpretation of these particular sonnets. Because you're meeting at Deptford, I'm going to focus on a few of the sonnet interpretations in my book that reveal Marlowe's unhappiness about the way they staged his death. I'll begin with Sonnet 34. This sonnet seems to be a sonnet letter to Thomas Walsingham. It tells us Marlowe was not at Deptford for the feigning of his death, which makes sense because it would have been necessary he leave England as soon as possible after Baines' note reached the Privy Council. The raw emotional tone of this sonnet suggests it was the first one written after he was told about the manner in which they staged his death. He is clearly unhappy about how they made him out to be a coward who would strike another man from behind so that Fraser could get off on a plea of murder in self-defense. Let me read the sonnet. Why didst thou promise such a beauteous day, and make me travel forth without my cloak, to let base clouds o'ertake me in my way, hiding thy bravery in their rotten smoke? 'Tis not enough that through the cloud thou break, to dry the rain on my storm-beaten face. For no man well of such a salve can speak, that heals the wound and cures not the disgrace. Nor can thy shame give physic to my grief. Though thou repent, yet I still have the loss. The offender's sorrow lends but weak relief to him that bears the strong offence's cross. Ah, but those tears are pearl which thy love sheds, and they are rich and ransom all ill deeds. Thomas Walsingham would have most likely been the man who made Marlowe travel forth, leave England. the brave man who had promised him his risky action would lead to a beauteous day. Instead, base clouds overtook Marlowe, and their rotten smoke hid this man's bravery. Base clouds and rotten smoke equal the disgrace of the coroner's report that states Marlowe was a coward who grabbed another man's knife from behind his back. Walsingham's bravery was a salve that healed a wound, the wound of heresy charges, which would lead to literal wounds such as hanging. But this salve that would allow Fraser to get off on a plea of murder in self-defense cures not the disgrace of Bain's note. It adds more disgrace. Perhaps when Walsingham sent Marlowe to the continent, plans had not congealed to the point where the necessary plea of murder in self-defense had been scripted for his employee, Fraser. And he'd promised Marlowe a beauteous day because he had another scenario in mind. But at the last hour, Lord Burleigh decided they needed to contrive a legal report of the death to ward off any suspicion. Although it is tempting to think Walsingham needed Marlowe's cloak to put on the body they used at Deptford, line 2 might merely refer to the English proverbial, "Although the sun shines, leave not thy cloak at home." Sonnet 74. But be contented when that fellow rest, without all bail shall carry me away. My life hath in this line some interest, which for memorial still with thee shall stay. When thou reviewest this, thou dost review, the very part was consecrate to thee. The earth can have but earth, which is his due. My spirit is thine, the better part of me. So then thou hast but lost the dregs of life, the prey of worms, my body being dead, the coward conquest of a wretch's knife, too base of thee to be remembered. The worth of that is that which it contains, and that is this, and this with thee remains. Sonnet 74 gives the reason his death had to be feigned, that fellow rest without all bail shall carry me away, and reveals how he died, the coward conquest of a wretch's knife. This is likely another sonnet letter to Thomas Walsingham, who, according to this interpretation, managed the saving of his life by having his employee Fraser agree to be the killer in the coroner's report. The very part was consecrated to thee. Again, he speaks of the method they used to get Fraser off on a plea of murder in self-defense. Too base of thee to be remembered. In Sonnet 34, he stated this method added more disgrace to his name. In Sonnet 74, he states this method was base of thee. Sonnet 33 speaks of how the early triumph of Marlowe's career as a dramatist was taken from him by Heaven's Son, who would seem to be Archbishop John Whitgift. This conclusion is derived from the Shakespearean homophones sons and son in the couplet's last line, spelled S-U-N, which are here taken to mean sons and sons spelled S-O-N. It is not surprising these words are veiled. Sonnet 33. Full many a glorious morning have I seen, flatter the mountain tops with sovereign eye, kissing with golden face the meadows green, gilding pale streams with heavenly alchemy. Anon permit the basest clouds to ride with ugly wrack on his celestial face, and from the forlorn world his visage hide, stealing unseen to west with this disgrace. Even so my sun when early morn did shine, with all triumphant splendor on my brow. But out, alack, he was but 1 hour mine, the region cloud hath masked him from me now. Yet him for this my love no whit disdaineth. Sons of the world may stain when heaven's sun staineth. The word to question in the 6th line is rack. What is a rack? Well, rack can mean a shelf, clouds driven before the wind, or a torture device. It cannot mean the first two because shelf does not fit the context and clouds driven before the wind is redundant when following line 5. Let me illustrate. Anon permit the basest clouds to ride, with ugly clouds driven before the wind on his celestial face. So, we are left with torture device. The adjective ugly for rack points to this meaning because a torture device is an ugly thing. The third stanza is speaking of the poet's personal sun. Even so, my sun one early morn did shine. Therefore, the couplet's last line, sons of the world may stain when heaven's sun staineth, is probably homophonic for sons of the world and heaven's sun spelled S-O-N. That these sons of the world may stain means they may cause dirty marks that are not easily removed, when heaven's sun causes dirty marks not easily removed. Let me write it out. Sons of the world may cause dirty marks that are not easily removed when heaven's sun causes dirty marks that are not easily removed. Whitgift is the region cloud masking the poet's early triumph by causing the dirty marks that are not easily removed, i.e., the informant Baines's charges of blasphemy. How did Whitgift stain Marlowe? He commandeered the ecclesiastical faction that used the informants, Baines and Drury, to get heretical charges on Marlowe through Baines' note and Drury's remembrances. And he agreed to have Marlowe's former writing partner, Thomas Kidd, tortured on the rack to aid them. The sons of the world that may stain when heaven's sun staineth are not sons of the church. They are sons of the world, i.e., commoners. To save Marlowe's life, which was in jeopardy after heaven's sun stained him, the 3 men at Deptford staged Marlowe's death in a manner that disgraced him as being the culprit, so Fraser could get off on murder in self-defense. These sons of the world, Thomas Walsingham's men, Poley, Skeers, and Fraser, were directed to play the parts, which inadvertently put another stain on Marlowe, the stain of cowardly striking Fraser from behind. If they had not given this story to Coroner Danby, Fraser would have been convicted of murder, instead of getting off by using the plea of murder in self-defense. When Marlowe writes, "Yet him for this my love no whit disdaineth," Marlowe is saying he understands why Fraser had been directed to feign his death in such a manner it brought further disgrace to him. He is stating he understands Fraser had to do it because of the blasphemy charges Baines' note had stained him with, which would have led to his own torture and actual death. Marlowe has gone through stages of grief in these sonnets. In Sonnet 34, he states the method they used when feigning his death added more disgrace to his name. In Sonnet 74, he states this method was base of thee. Sonnet 33 shows his reconciliation to this method. He understands Fraser had to do it because of the blasphemy charges Baines' note had stained him with. A more detailed description of these sonnets is found in the essays. Lastly, I'll read an excerpt from one of the book's 27 essays, Reconsidering Corkine versus Marlowe. Most of Christopher Marlowe's biographers have written about William Corkine's 1592 suit against the dramatist for assault in Canterbury. Evidently, no biographer did further research on Corkine. I was searching through the Canterbury archives for further information regarding Corkine and discovered that 2.5 months before he brought this charge of assault against Marlowe, he was charged with assault by one Reginald Digges. Further exploration of the Canterbury archives led to the discovery William Corkine, tailor, was in court a total of 15 times during the span of 8 years. He had 1 indictment for assault, was the plaintiff in 9 cases, the defendant in 5. We know Corkine did not contest Digges' charges, which fairly tells us he was guilty of the assault. We also now know Corkine accused Marlowe of attacking him 10 weeks after Reginald Digges had accused him of the same. We can fairly ascertain from these newly discovered Corkine documents he was not shy when it came to using the court system. and many other men in Canterbury had difficulty with this tailor. This recent discovery of Digges versus Corkine and Corkine's numerous visits to court raises several new questions.